Code Red. All visitors evacuate immediately. Security Supervisor Sarah Coleman's voice cracked through the intercom as she watched 380 pounds of black bear lumber past the cotton candy stand. Her radio slipped from trembling fingers, clattering against concrete. This wasn't supposed to happen. Bruno had been secure in his reinforced enclosure just minutes ago. Children's screams pierced the autumn air as families scattered like leaves in a hurricane. Strollers abandoned, ice cream forgotten, pure terror painting every face except one. An elderly man in a brown cardigan stood motionless near the main gate, silver hair catching sunlight, blue eyes fixed on the approaching bear, with something that looked almost like recognition. "Sir, move!" Coleman shouted into her megaphone, her own feet frozen in disbelief. William Mackenzie, 72 years old, didn't flinch, didn't run. His weathered hands slowly reached toward the massive creature that could kill him with a single swipe. What connection could an old man possibly have with San Diego Zoo's most dangerous resident? And why, after 20 years of perfect containment, had Bruno chosen today to break free? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. William Bill Mackenzie had always believed that some promises transcend death itself. At 72, with silver hair thinning at the crown and wire-rimmed glasses perched on his weathered nose, he carried the quiet dignity of a man who had devoted 45 years of his life to creatures that couldn't say thank you. The San Diego Zoo had been his cathedral, and every animal within its gates had been his congregation. 3 years had passed since his mandatory retirement, 3 years since Martha's funeral, 3 years of waking up to silence in their modest Claremont apartment. The pension barely covered rent and medications, but William never complained. "Back in my day," he would tell the neighborhood kids, "a man's word was his bond, and gratitude didn't need a paycheck." This Saturday morning had felt different somehow. While brewing his single cup of coffee, William had found himself talking longer than usual to Martha's photograph on the kitchen table. "Something's calling me back today, sweetheart," he'd whispered to her smiling face. "Like you used to say, miracles happen when we need them most." The 3-bus journey to Balboa Park had seemed less burdensome, his arthritic joints cooperating as if sensing something significant awaited. 20 yards away, Bruno embodied everything magnificent and tragic about captivity. The North American black bear stood nearly 7 feet tall on his hind legs, his obsidian coat gleaming despite the psychological weight he carried. At 20 years old, he was in his prime. Yet zoo veterinarians had documented concerning behavioral changes over recent months. He refused breeding attempts with female bears, showed signs of depression, and displayed an almost human-like melancholy that puzzled even experienced animal behaviorists. Bruno's left front paw bore the subtle evidence of his origin story, a slight limp from a birth defect that had sealed his fate 2 decades ago. In the wild, his mother had rejected him as unfit for survival. That defect, barely noticeable to casual observers, had actually saved his life by making him unsuitable for release back into the wilderness. The bear possessed an intelligence that made veteran keepers uncomfortable. He recognized over 50 English words, could solve complex problems, and demonstrated emotional responses that challenged scientific understanding of animal consciousness. Some staff whispered that Bruno seemed to be waiting for something or someone. Dr. Benjamin Harrison represented everything modern about zoological science. 43 years old with a Harvard PhD in animal behavior, he had arrived 6 months ago with impressive credentials and ambitious plans for research expansion. Tall and angular, with nervous habits that manifested whenever large animals were present, Harrison spoke in measured academic tones about evidence-based protocols and quantifiable behavioral metrics. What the zoo board didn't know was that Harrison's interest in bear behavior stemmed from a childhood trauma buried beneath layers of scholarly achievement. At 12 years old, he had witnessed his father's death during a research expedition to Yellowstone, torn apart by a grizzly bear protecting her cubs. The incident had shaped Harrison's worldview into a rigid belief that wild animals, no matter how domesticated they appeared, remained fundamentally dangerous and unpredictable. Today, that buried trauma would collide with forces Harrison couldn't control or understand. William's Saturday had begun with the familiar ritual of grief. Every morning since Martha's passing, he would sit at their small kitchen table, studying her photograph while sipping black coffee from the chipped mug she had painted during their honeymoon in Tijuana 38 years ago. The faded roses on its surface had witnessed countless conversations, but today felt different. "Martha, sweetheart," he had whispered to her smiling face. "I dreamed about Bruno again last night. He was calling for me, just like when he was little." The apartment walls seemed to lean in, listening to the one-sided conversation that had become William's lifeline to sanity. "The doctors say my memory might start going soon, but I remember every detail about that boy, every single day we spent together." The bus ride to Balboa Park had taken 2 hours and 3 transfers, but William didn't mind. At 72, time moved differently anyway. He carried Martha's small purse containing her favorite honey cookies, the same recipe she had used to spoil Bruno during his first years at the zoo. The autumn sunshine felt warm on his face as families bustled past him toward the entrance gates, children chattering excitedly about seeing lions and elephants. 6 blocks away, Dr. Harrison was implementing the final phase of his carefully orchestrated plan. The maintenance request had been filed weeks ago, routine inspection of electronic locking systems in the large mammal enclosures. As the senior research director, Harrison possessed master access to all security protocols, a privilege he intended to exploit. "Just a temporary malfunction," he muttered, typing commands into the maintenance terminal. "System failure during peak visitor hours. Tragic but predictable with outdated equipment." His hands trembled slightly as he navigated through Bruno's enclosure specifications. The bear that had haunted his nightmares for 31 years would finally serve a purpose, proving that wild animals could never truly be domesticated. The sabotage was elegant in its simplicity. A few altered lines of code, a delayed timer set for maximum visitor capacity, and backup systems mysteriously offline for scheduled maintenance. When the inevitable tragedy occurred, Harrison would emerge as the prescient scientist who had warned about inadequate safety measures. Research grants would follow, professional recognition, perhaps even a book deal about the dangerous delusion of interspecies bonding. At exactly 2:15 p.m., as William stood near the African exhibits reading a plaque about conservation efforts, the first electronic lock clicked open. Bruno, who had been lying listlessly in his enclosure, lifted his massive head. Something had changed. The familiar hum of security systems had fallen silent. The bear rose to his feet with surprising grace for such a large animal. His nostrils flared, catching scents carried on the afternoon breeze. Hundreds of human smells mingled together, but beneath the chaos of sunscreen and popcorn and cotton candy, one particular fragrance made his heart rate accelerate. Familiar, comforting, impossible after so many years, yet unmistakable. Bruno pushed against the reinforced gate. It swung open effortlessly. The first person to notice was 8-year-old Tommy Rodriguez, who had been photographing the bear through the safety glass. "Mommy," he said, tugging on his mother's sleeve, "the bear isn't in his cage anymore." Maria Rodriguez looked up from her phone and screamed. That scream triggered a cascade of terror that rippled through the zoo like wildfire. Security cameras captured Bruno's emergence from the enclosure, his massive frame moving with deliberate purpose along the main pathway. Unlike an escaped animal seeking freedom or food, Bruno walked as if following directions only he could perceive. "Code Red. All visitors evacuate immediately," Sarah Coleman's voice boomed over the intercom system. The 35-year-old security supervisor had handled everything from lost children to heart attacks, but never an escaped predator. Her training kicked in automatically as she coordinated evacuation procedures while her mind struggled to process the impossibility of the situation. Chaos erupted throughout the park. Families grabbed children and fled toward exits, leaving behind strollers, cameras, and half-eaten snacks. The carefully maintained tranquility of a Saturday afternoon shattered into screams, running footsteps, and the wailing of emergency sirens. Bruno ignored the pandemonium surrounding him. Cars honked as visitors rushed to parking lots. Security guards shouted orders while pulling on protective gear. The bear walked steadily forward, his dark eyes scanning the fleeing crowds with singular focus. Dr. Harrison arrived at the scene within minutes, his prepared expression of professional concern masking barely contained excitement. News crews would be here soon. This was exactly the dramatic footage he needed to advance his research agenda. He pulled out his phone and began recording, positioning himself at a safe distance while maintaining a clear view of the unfolding disaster. William, meanwhile, had heard the commotion but remained near the education center, struggling to understand what was happening. The hearing aids that Medicare barely covered made it difficult to process overlapping sounds. When he finally saw the massive black shape moving through the scattered crowd, time seemed to stop completely. Recognition hit him like electricity. That particular gait, the slight favor of the left front paw, the distinctive way the great head turned to survey surroundings. "Bruno?" he whispered, his voice lost in the cacophony of evacuation alarms. The moment of recognition hit William like a lightning strike. 20 years collapsed into a single heartbeat as he watched the massive black bear moving through the chaos with unmistakable purpose. That distinctive walk, the slight favor of the left front paw, the way Bruno's head tilted when processing new information, these were details etched into William's soul during 18 months of round-the-clock care 2 decades ago. "Sir, you need to evacuate now." Security guard Marcus Torres grabbed William's arm, trying to pull him toward the nearest exit. Families streamed past them in panic, children crying, parents shouting directions to stay together. The elderly man in the brown cardigan seemed frozen in place, staring at the approaching bear with an expression Torres couldn't interpret. "That's my boy," William whispered, his voice barely audible above the sirens and screaming. He gently but firmly extracted his arm from the guard's grip. "Young man, I've been waiting 3 years to see him again." Torres thought the old man had lost his mind. "Sir, that's a 380-pound black bear. He could kill you in seconds. Please, let me escort you to safety." But William Mackenzie had spent 45 years reading animal behavior, and what he saw approaching wasn't predatory aggression. Bruno's ears were forward but relaxed. His mouth was closed, not displaying teeth. His body language spoke of curiosity and recognition rather than threat. Most telling of all, the bear's dark eyes were locked directly on William's face, with an intensity that transcended mere animal instinct. 50 yards away, Dr. Harrison watched through his phone camera as his carefully orchestrated plan began to unfold. The bear was free, crowds were panicking, and soon there would be either a mauling or a shooting. Both scenarios that would validate his research proposals about the inherent danger of large predators in captivity. He had positioned himself behind a concrete barrier, close enough to capture dramatic footage but far enough to ensure personal safety. "This is exactly what I predicted," Harrison muttered to himself, already composing the opening lines of his future journal article. Emotional attachment to wild animals creates dangerous delusions that endanger public safety. His finger hovered over the record button, ready to document what he assumed would be either an attack or a necessary use of lethal force. Bruno continued his steady approach, now 30 yards from William. The bear's nostrils flared constantly, processing scents that triggered memories buried deep in his neurological pathways. Beyond the overwhelming mix of human fear sweat and spilled food, one particular fragrance grew stronger with each step, a combination of Old Spice aftershave, hand soap, and something indefinably comforting that spoke to the deepest centers of his brain. Security Supervisor Sarah Coleman arrived with a tranquilizer rifle and a team of armed guards. She had called in the crisis protocol that required immediate neutralization of escaped dangerous animals. But something about the scene made her hesitate. The bear wasn't behaving aggressively. If anything, Bruno seemed almost purposeful. "Target the animal for immediate sedation," she ordered through her radio. But her voice carried uncertainty. In 15 years of zoo security work, she had never encountered a situation like this. Standard protocol demanded swift action to protect human life, yet the elderly man's refusal to evacuate suggested a complexity she didn't understand. "Ma'am," came the response through her earpiece, "the civilian won't clear the area. Do we have permission to use force?" Coleman watched through binoculars as William Mackenzie stood his ground while a massive predator approached. The old man's body language showed no fear. Instead, he appeared to be waiting. "Negative on civilian force," she radioed back. "But prepare for animal neutralization if it makes any aggressive movement." 20 yards now separated man and bear. William removed his wire-rimmed glasses with trembling hands, wiping tears he hadn't realized were falling. Every detail of Bruno's appearance brought back memories: the slight graying around the muzzle, the intelligent dark eyes, the powerful shoulders that had once been small enough to cradle in his arms. "Hello, beautiful boy," William said softly, his voice carrying the same gentle tone he had used during countless bottle feedings and bedtime stories. "Daddy's here. Daddy came back." Bruno stopped completely at the sound of that voice. His massive head tilted to the right, exactly the same gesture he had made as a cub when trying to understand human speech. A sound emerged from deep in his chest, not a growl or roar, but a soft rumbling that zoo staff had never heard before. It was almost like purring, if bears could purr. The assembled security team watched in stunned silence as the dangerous escaped animal sat down on his haunches, assuming a non-threatening posture. Bruno's tail, what little black bears possessed, moved slightly from side to side. His ears remained forward and alert, but showed no signs of aggression or agitation. "What the hell is happening here?" Coleman whispered into her radio. Dr. Harrison's carefully planned scenario was beginning to deviate from his expectations. The bear should have either fled toward the exits or displayed territorial aggression when confronted by humans. Instead, Bruno seemed to be communicating. This wasn't part of Harrison's research projections, and it threatened to undermine the dramatic footage he needed to advance his career. "Security, that animal needs to be tranquilized immediately," Harrison shouted, abandoning his observer role. "It's exhibiting unpredictable behavior that could turn violent at any moment." But William Mackenzie was already extending his right hand, palm up, in a gesture that had been repeated thousands of times 20 years ago. It was the same motion he had used to offer bottle feedings, to encourage trust, to build the bond that had defined both their lives during those precious 18 months together. Bruno's response defied every scientific paper Harrison had ever read about wild animal behavior. The massive bear leaned forward and gently sniffed William's outstretched palm, his wet nose touching weathered skin with incredible delicacy. Then, in a display that would be replayed millions of times on social media, Bruno began to lick William's hand with the same careful affection he had shown as a 6-week-old cub. The moment froze in time, witnessed by security cameras, smartphone videos, and the disbelieving eyes of everyone present. An elderly man and a dangerous predator, reunited after 2 decades, sharing a connection that transcended every rational explanation. The impossible reunion between William and Bruno shattered every assumption about animal memory and emotional capacity. As the massive black bear gently licked his former caretaker's weathered palm, memories flooded back through both their minds like water through a broken dam. 20 years of separation collapsed into nothing as neural pathways, dormant for decades, suddenly blazed with recognition. William's trembling hand moved to stroke Bruno's massive head, fingers finding the exact spot behind the left ear that had always calmed the cub during thunderstorms. "My sweet boy," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "You remember Daddy, don't you? You never forgot." Bruno responded with that deep, rumbling sound that wasn't quite a growl, a vocalization that seemed to come from his very soul. The bear's dark eyes never left William's face, studying every line and wrinkle with the intensity of someone memorizing a beloved photograph. When William spoke, Bruno's ears perked forward exactly as they had when he was learning his first words as a cub. Security Supervisor Sarah Coleman lowered her tranquilizer rifle, her professional training warring with what she was witnessing. "This is impossible," she breathed into her radio. "The animal it's like he knows him, actually knows him." Dr. Harrison stepped forward, his face flushed with frustration. His carefully orchestrated plan was derailing before his eyes, and worse, dozens of zoo visitors were recording everything on their phones. "That's anthropomorphic projection," he announced loudly, his voice carrying the authority of his Harvard credentials. "Bears don't form lasting emotional attachments. What you're seeing is simple food conditioning and coincidental behavior." But even as Harrison spoke, William was demonstrating something that defied academic explanation. He extended both arms, palms facing up, and said clearly, "Bruno, give Daddy a hug." The massive bear immediately rose on his hind legs, towering over the elderly man at his full 7-foot height. For a heart-stopping moment, every security officer's finger tensed on their triggers. Then Bruno gently enveloped William in his powerful forelegs, careful not to use his claws, holding him with the same protective tenderness he had shown as a cub when William was sick with flu. The crowd of evacuated visitors, now watching from a safe distance, fell completely silent. Phones recorded from every angle as the emotional reunion unfolded. This wasn't the savage mauling that news outlets expected. This was something pure and profound that challenged every assumption about the relationship between humans and wild animals. William closed his eyes, breathing in the familiar musky scent of Bruno's fur. "I missed you so much, beautiful boy. Every single day for 3 years, I missed you." Tears streamed down his cheeks as he felt the steady heartbeat of the creature he had bottle-fed through countless sleepless nights. The embrace lasted nearly a full minute before Bruno gently set William back on his feet. The bear then did something that made several witnesses gasp audibly. He placed his massive right paw directly over William's heart, just as he had been taught as a cub when William said the words, "I love you." "Oh my God," whispered Maria Rodriguez, who had been recording on her phone. "He's telling him he loves him back." Dr. Harrison's face darkened as he realized his research agenda was crumbling before his eyes. This display of interspecies bonding was exactly the opposite of what he needed to prove his theories about animal unpredictability. Worse, the footage being captured would likely go viral, cementing a narrative about animals that contradicted everything Harrison believed. But the reunion was triggering something deeper than just emotional recognition. As William's hand rested on Bruno's massive shoulder, he felt his mind becoming clearer than it had been in months. The fog of early-stage Alzheimer's that had been creeping into his thoughts seemed to lift, as if Bruno's presence was somehow sharpening his cognitive function. "Martha was right," William said softly, speaking to Bruno but loud enough for others to hear. "She always said you were our miracle baby. She used to tell me that some souls are meant to bridge different worlds, to show us what love really looks like." The mention of Martha triggered a cascade of memories that Bruno seemed to share. The bear made a soft, whimpering sound, the same vocalization he had made as a cub when Martha would visit the nursery with her homemade honey cakes. Even after all these years, Bruno remembered the woman who had helped raise him. Sarah Coleman approached cautiously, her weapon lowered but still ready. She had been zoo security supervisor for 15 years, but she had never witnessed anything that challenged her understanding of animal behavior so completely. "Sir," she said gently to William, "I need to understand what's happening here. How do you know this bear?" William looked up from Bruno, his arm still resting against the bear's flank. "I raised him from a 6-week-old cub. His mother rejected him because of his birth defect. That left paw was damaged, made him unsuitable for the wild. I bottle-fed him every 3 hours for 18 months, read to him every afternoon, taught him his first words. He was our son in every way that mattered." The explanation sent ripples through the assembled crowd. Phone cameras captured every word as the truth began to emerge. This wasn't a random encounter between a confused elderly man and a dangerous predator. This was a reunion between father and son, separated by institutional policy, but never by emotional bond. Dr. Harrison could see his carefully constructed narrative slipping away. "Regardless of past interactions," he interjected, his voice sharp with authority, "this animal poses an immediate threat to public safety. Protocol demands immediate sedation and return to containment." But William Mackenzie had found his voice, strengthened by Bruno's presence and the clarity that seemed to return whenever he touched his son. "Doctor, with all due respect for your education, there are some things that can't be learned in classrooms. This bear is not a threat. He's a 20-year-old soul who just wanted to see his daddy again." As if responding to William's words, Bruno lowered himself to the ground and rolled onto his side, the same position he had assumed as a cub during their daily reading sessions. His massive bulk settled against William's legs, and the elderly man instinctively sat down beside him, one hand stroking the glossy black fur. The sight was so unexpected, so contrary to every wildlife documentary and nature program, that several zoo employees began to question their own understanding of animal psychology. Here was a 380-pound predator, acting like an oversized house cat, seeking comfort and affection from the human who had raised him. "This is exactly how we used to spend our afternoons," William explained to the fascinated onlookers. "I'd read him the sports section, sometimes the weather report. He liked the sound of my voice. Martha used to joke that Bruno understood English better than most teenagers." Doctor. Harrison's frustration boiled over. The footage being captured was creating exactly the kind of sentimental narrative he had dedicated his career to debunking. "This anthropomorphic fantasy is dangerous," he declared, his voice rising. "Wild animals are not house pets. They don't form human-like emotional bonds. What you're seeing is conditioned response based on food association, nothing more." But even as Harrison spoke, Bruno was demonstrating behaviors that contradicted the doctor's assertions. When William said, "Bruno, show me your paw," the bear immediately lifted his left front leg, displaying the slight deformity that had saved his life 2 decades ago. When William asked, "Where's your heart, beautiful boy?" Bruno placed his own paw over his chest, then reached out to touch William's heart again. These weren't tricks or conditioned responses. They were demonstrations of vocabulary and emotional understanding that challenged fundamental assumptions about animal consciousness. The assembled crowd watched in wonder as the reunion continued to unfold, each interaction revealing new depths to the bond between man and bear. Sarah Coleman found herself caught between professional duty and human amazement. Her radio crackled with demands for status updates from zoo administration, media inquiries from news outlets, and coordination requests from police units surrounding the facility. But she couldn't bring herself to interrupt what was clearly a profound emotional moment. "Command, this is Coleman," she finally radioed. "The situation is unusual. The bear is exhibiting non-aggressive behavior and appears to have a pre-existing relationship with the civilian. Requesting guidance on how to proceed." The response came immediately. "All dangerous animals must be contained immediately. Use whatever force necessary to ensure public safety." But looking at William Mackenzie sitting peacefully beside Bruno, both of them radiating contentment and mutual affection, Sarah Coleman realized that sometimes official protocols couldn't account for the miraculous complexity of real life. Sometimes rules had to bend in the face of something larger than policy, something like love that transcended every boundary humans tried to impose on the natural world. As afternoon sunlight filtered through the trees, casting golden light on the unlikely pair, witnesses began to understand they were seeing something that would change their perspective forever. This wasn't just about an escaped bear or an elderly man's delusion. This was proof that emotional connections could survive anything, even decades of separation and the barriers between species. The peaceful reunion was about to be shattered by forces beyond William and Bruno's control. Dr. Harrison, watching his carefully orchestrated plan collapse into a heartwarming viral video, made a decision that would reveal the darkness he had carried for 31 years. He stepped forward with the authority of his position, his voice cutting through the afternoon air like a blade. "Security, I'm ordering immediate sedation of this animal," Harrison commanded, his Harvard credentials giving weight to words born from personal trauma rather than professional judgment. "What you're witnessing is anthropomorphic delusion. This bear is exhibiting unpredictable behavior that could turn lethal at any moment." Sarah Coleman hesitated, her finger hovering near her radio. Everything she was seeing contradicted Harrison's assessment, but chain of command was clear. As senior research director, Harrison outranked her in matters of animal safety. "Sir, the bear appears completely docile. Perhaps we could—" "I've studied animal behavior for 20 years, Harrison interrupted, his voice rising with barely contained hysteria. "I know exactly what these predators are capable of." His hand trembled as he pointed at Bruno, and for a moment his composed academic facade cracked, revealing the terrified 12-year-old boy who had watched his father die in Yellowstone 3 decades ago. William sensed the shift in atmosphere immediately. Bruno, still resting against his legs, raised his massive head and looked toward Harrison with intelligent eyes. The bear's ears flicked forward, processing the aggressive tone and hostile body language from the approaching human. For the first time since the reunion began, Bruno showed signs of tension. "Easy, beautiful boy," William murmured, his hand finding the familiar spot behind Bruno's ear. "Daddy's here. Nobody's going to hurt you." But even as he spoke the soothing words, William felt his own anxiety rising. Something about Dr. Harrison's demeanor triggered alarms developed over 4 decades of reading both human and animal behavior. Harrison pulled out his phone and began recording, but this time his purpose wasn't documentation, it was manipulation. "I'm creating a record of this dangerous situation," he announced loudly enough for the gathered crowd to hear. "When this animal attacks, the footage will show that proper protocols were ignored." The word attacks hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Bruno's ears flattened slightly against his head, not in aggression but in confusion. The bear had never heard that tone directed at him before, had never been the target of such obvious hostility. His breathing quickened as stress hormones began flooding his system. Maria Rodriguez, still filming from the safety barrier, whispered to her husband, "Something's wrong with that doctor. Look at his eyes. He's scared, but it's like he wants something bad to happen. Doctor." Harrison's fear was indeed palpable, but it was fear mixed with opportunity. This bear represented everything he had spent his adult life trying to prove, that wild animals were fundamentally dangerous, that emotional connections with them were deadly delusions, that his father's death had been inevitable rather than a tragic accident. If Bruno could be provoked into aggressive behavior, even defensively, Harrison would have the evidence he needed. "Dr. Harrison," William said, struggling to his feet while keeping one hand on Bruno's shoulder, "I don't know what your agenda is, but you're making my boy nervous. Please step back and let us handle this peacefully." "Your boy?" Harrison's laugh was sharp and brittle. "That's exactly the kind of dangerous thinking that gets people killed. That's not your child. It's a wild predator that could tear you apart without a second thought." As Harrison spoke, his own suppressed memories began surfacing. The sound of his father's screams, the sight of massive claws and teeth, the helplessness of watching from 50 yards away as Dr. Robert Harrison tried to protect an injured grizzly cub and paid with his life. For 31 years, Benjamin Harrison had buried that trauma under layers of academic achievement. But seeing the bond between William and Bruno was ripping open wounds that had never properly healed. Bruno's response to the mounting tension was heartbreaking in its humanity. Instead of displaying aggression, the massive bear moved protectively closer to William, positioning his bulk between the elderly man and the source of hostile energy. His dark eyes never left Harrison's face, but his expression showed confusion rather than threat, as if he couldn't understand why this human was emanating such negative emotions. "Look at that," Harrison pointed with a shaking finger. "Classic predatory positioning. The animal is preparing to defend its territory." This is exactly how attacks begin. But Sarah Coleman, watching through her binoculars, saw something entirely different. "Sir, respectfully, that bear is protecting the civilian, not threatening him. The body language is defensive, not aggressive." Harrison's face flushed red with frustration. His carefully planned scenario was supposed to end with either a mauling or a justified shooting, both of which would validate his research and advance his career. Instead, he was witnessing a display of interspecies loyalty that challenged everything he believed about the natural world. The gathered crowd began to sense the real drama wasn't between man and bear, but between two very different philosophies about the relationship between humans and animals. William represented old-school animal husbandry based on respect and understanding, while Harrison embodied modern detachment disguised as scientific objectivity. "You want to know the truth about wild animals?" Harrison's voice cracked as suppressed trauma finally broke through. "My father was Robert Harrison, one of the most respected animal behaviorists in the country. He believed exactly what you believe, that bonds with wild animals were possible, that respect and understanding could bridge species differences. A grizzly bear taught him how wrong he was." The revelation sent shockwaves through the assembled group. Several people lowered their phones, suddenly understanding that they were witnessing something much more complex than an escaped animal story. This was about generational trauma, about how fear could masquerade as science, about the different ways people processed loss and tragedy. William's expression softened with understanding. "Doctor, I'm sorry for your loss, truly, but you can't blame every animal for one terrible accident." "Accident?" Harrison's laugh was hollow and bitter. My father died because he believed what you believe, that these creatures could be trusted, that emotional connections made them safe. I've spent my entire career proving that such beliefs are dangerous delusions. Bruno, sensing William's emotional distress, did something that made several witnesses gasp. The massive bear gently nuzzled against William's shoulder, offering comfort in the face of human conflict. It was a gesture so tender, so obviously caring, that it contradicted every word Harrison had spoken about predatory behavior. "You see that?" William said gently, stroking Bruno's massive head. "That's not predatory behavior, Doctor. That's love. That's a son comforting his father." But Harrison was beyond reason now, his traumatic memories fully unleashed. Love? That animal is incapable of love. It's a killing machine guided by instinct and conditioning. Watch what happens when I force it to show its true nature. Before anyone could react, Harrison grabbed a tranquilizer dart from Sarah Coleman's equipment belt and threw it directly at Bruno's face, not to sedate the bear, but to provoke a defensive reaction that would justify lethal force. The dart bounced harmlessly off Bruno's thick skull, but the aggressive action triggered exactly the response Harrison had hoped for. Bruno reared up on his hind legs, towering at his full 7-foot height, and released a roar of confusion and fear that echoed across the entire zoo. "There!" Harrison shouted triumphantly, his phone camera capturing the dramatic moment. "That's the real animal! That's what I've been warning you about!" But what happened next defied every prediction Harrison had made. Instead of attacking or fleeing, Bruno immediately dropped back to all fours and positioned himself protectively in front of William. The roar hadn't been aggressive. It had been a warning, a communication that said, "Leave us alone," rather than, "I'm going to hurt you." William stepped around Bruno's protective bulk and faced Harrison directly. "Doctor, your father didn't die because he loved animals. He died because he was protecting them, just like Bruno is protecting me right now. That's what love looks like, putting someone else's safety before your own." The words hit Harrison like physical blows. In 31 years, no one had ever suggested that his father's death was an act of heroism rather than tragic naivety. The possibility that Dr. Robert Harrison had died saving a bear cub rather than being killed by one challenged everything Benjamin had built his career upon. As news vans began arriving at the zoo's perimeter and helicopter cameras circled overhead, the confrontation between past and present, fear and love, scientific detachment and emotional connection was about to reach its climax. The confrontation between Dr. Harrison's trauma and the undeniable evidence of Bruno's gentleness was spiraling toward a breaking point when tragedy struck from an unexpected direction. William, overwhelmed by the emotional intensity of reuniting with Bruno and defending him against Harrison's aggression, suddenly staggered backward, his face draining of color. "William!" Sarah Coleman shouted as she watched the elderly man clutch his chest, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. The stress of the confrontation, combined with the overwhelming joy of seeing Bruno again, had triggered what appeared to be a cardiac event. Bruno immediately sensed something was catastrophically wrong. The massive bear abandoned his protective stance and moved to William's side, making soft, whimpering sounds of distress. As William collapsed to his knees on the concrete pathway, Bruno gently nuzzled against him, trying to offer comfort the only way he knew how. "Call emergency medical services immediately," Coleman commanded into her radio, but her voice carried a tremor of despair. The nearest hospital was 20 minutes away through San Diego traffic, and William's condition was deteriorating rapidly. William's vision blurred as waves of pain radiated through his chest and down his left arm. But through the physical agony, his greatest fear wasn't death. It was the thought that Bruno might not understand why Daddy was leaving again. With tremendous effort, he raised his trembling hand to touch Bruno's massive head one final time. "I'm sorry, beautiful boy," William gasped, each word requiring enormous effort. Daddy has to go away again. But I want you to know, seeing you today was worth everything. You gave me the best years of my life." Bruno's response was heartbreaking in its desperate humanity. The bear lay down beside William and carefully placed his massive head on the elderly man's lap, just as he had done as a cub when William was sick with flu decades ago. The 380-pound predator that Dr. Harrison considered so dangerous was now providing comfort to a dying man with the tenderness of a devoted son. Dr. Harrison stood frozen in shock, his phone still recording but his triumphant expression replaced by horror. This wasn't the dramatic validation of his theories he had orchestrated. This was a genuine medical emergency caused partly by his own aggressive provocation. For the first time in years, Harrison found himself questioning whether his quest for professional vindication was worth the human cost. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes, but Bruno's presence created an immediate complication. The massive bear refused to move away from William, and any attempt to approach resulted in anxious vocalizations that weren't aggressive but were clearly distressed communications. Bruno seemed to understand that these strangers wanted to take William away, and he was determined to prevent another separation. "We can't get to the patient," paramedic Lisa Chen radioed to her supervisor. "There's a bear protecting him, and it won't let us approach." Sarah Coleman faced an impossible decision. Standard protocol required sedating Bruno immediately, but the tranquilizer would take several minutes to take effect. Precious time that William didn't have. Meanwhile, the bear's protective behavior, while not aggressive, was preventing life-saving medical intervention. William, slipping in and out of consciousness, understood the dilemma. With his final reserves of strength, he whispered to Bruno, "Good boy, let the doctors help Daddy. Be good for me." The massive bear looked directly into William's eyes, and what passed between them defied scientific explanation. Bruno slowly, reluctantly, moved back several feet, far enough to allow medical access, but close enough to maintain visual contact with his beloved caretaker. The paramedics worked frantically, establishing IV lines and administering cardiac medications, while Bruno watched every movement with intelligent, anxious eyes. The bear's soft, whimpering sounds created an audio backdrop that broke the hearts of everyone present, including the news crews who were now broadcasting the drama live across the nation. "Patient is in severe cardiac distress," Chen reported. "We need immediate transport to UCSD Medical Center." But as they prepared to load William onto the stretcher, Bruno took several steps forward, his distress becoming more pronounced. The bear seemed to understand that the ambulance would take William away, potentially forever. His vocalizations became more urgent, not aggressive roars, but something that sounded almost like crying. For 20 years, Bruno had waited for this reunion, and now it was ending in the worst possible way. William, barely conscious on the stretcher, heard Bruno's distress calls and fought to remain alert. Let me say goodbye," he whispered to the paramedics. They hesitated, knowing that every second counted, but recognizing that this might be the last communication between two souls who had shared something extraordinary. "Bruno," William called weakly, and the bear immediately moved closer, careful not to interfere with the medical equipment. "Daddy loves you so much, beautiful boy. You were the best son any man could ask for. Be strong, be good, and maybe someday we'll read the newspaper together again." Bruno's response would be replayed millions of times on social media and news broadcasts worldwide. The massive bear gently placed his paw over William's heart one final time, their secret "I love you" gesture, and then stepped back to allow the paramedics to continue their work. As the ambulance pulled away with sirens wailing, Bruno remained standing in the exact spot where he had said goodbye, watching until the emergency vehicle disappeared from sight. His mournful calls echoed across the zoo, a sound so filled with genuine grief that several witnesses began crying openly. Dr. Harrison, who had been recording everything, slowly lowered his phone. The footage he had captured wasn't the dramatic animal attack he had orchestrated, but something far more powerful, evidence of a bond so profound that it challenged every assumption about animal consciousness and emotional capacity. "Dear God," Harrison whispered, finally understanding what his 31 years of trauma had blinded him to. "What have I done?" Sarah Coleman approached Bruno cautiously, expecting the bear to be agitated or unpredictable after the traumatic separation. Instead, she found a creature in obvious emotional distress, exhibiting behaviors that were heartbreakingly human in their grief. Bruno had positioned himself facing the direction the ambulance had taken, and he remained there motionless, as if waiting for William to return. News of the dramatic reunion and William's collapse spread across social media with unprecedented speed. #Bruno and Bill began trending globally as millions of people shared videos of the bear's protective behavior and gentle goodbye. Animal behaviorists, ethicists, and ordinary citizens engaged in passionate debates about the nature of interspecies relationships and the emotional lives of animals. At UCSD Medical Center, William Mackenzie fought for his life while doctors worked to stabilize his cardiac rhythm. His condition was critical, complicated by his age and the massive stress his system had endured. But in his semi-conscious state, William's thoughts remained focused on Bruno, wondering if his son understood why Daddy had to leave again. Meanwhile, Bruno's vigil continued as afternoon faded into evening. Zoo staff attempted to coax him back to his enclosure with favorite foods and familiar voices, but the bear showed no interest in anything except maintaining his watch for William's return. His behavior was so obviously grief-stricken that even skeptical observers began to acknowledge the reality of animal emotions. Dr. Harrison spent the evening reviewing the footage he had captured, and with each viewing, his perspective shifted further from his original agenda. The video showed not dangerous unpredictability, but loyalty, love, and loss that transcended species boundaries. For the first time since his father's death, Harrison began to consider that his lifelong crusade against human-animal bonds might have been misguided. As night fell over the San Diego Zoo, Bruno remained in his vigil, a 380-pound monument to devotion that challenged everyone who witnessed it to reconsider their understanding of consciousness, emotion, and the mysterious connections that can form between different species. The bear's patient wait for William's return was both heartbreaking and inspiring, proof that some relationships are too profound to be contained by academic theories or institutional policies. The story was no longer just about an escaped bear or an elderly man's reunion with his former charge. It had become a meditation on love, loss, and the unexpected places where we find family. And somewhere in a hospital 20 miles away, William Mackenzie's heart continued fighting, sustained perhaps by the knowledge that someone was waiting for him with unwavering faith. 3 days passed in a blur of medical uncertainty and global media attention. William Mackenzie lay in intensive care at UCSD Medical Center, his condition stabilized but still critical, while 20 miles away, Bruno maintained his heartbreaking vigil at the exact spot where the ambulance had taken his beloved caretaker. The bear refused food, showed no interest in his enclosure, and continued scanning the horizon for any sign of William's return. The story had exploded across international news outlets, with #Bruno and Bill becoming the most trending hashtag in social media history. Animal rights activists, scientists, celebrities, and ordinary people from around the world shared the footage of their reunion and separation, creating a global conversation about the emotional lives of animals and the bonds that transcend species. But it was Sarah Coleman who made the discovery that would change everything. Working late in her security office, reviewing footage from the day of Bruno's escape, she noticed something that had been overlooked in the chaos of events. The maintenance logs showed that Dr. Harrison had accessed Bruno's enclosure systems just hours before the breakout, using his master keycard to override safety protocols. "Son of a bitch," Coleman whispered as she cross-referenced the timestamps. Harrison hadn't just failed to prevent the escape, he had orchestrated it. Frame by frame, the security footage revealed Harrison's sabotage, his strategic positioning for filming, and his deliberate attempts to provoke Bruno into aggressive behavior. The evidence was damning: deleted maintenance records, falsified safety reports, and video proof of Harrison accessing restricted systems. But perhaps most revealing was older footage that showed Harrison's behavioral patterns over his 6 months at the zoo. Every interaction with large animals displayed the same nervous tension, the same barely concealed fear that had exploded during his confrontation with William. Coleman immediately contacted Zoo Director Margaret Foster, who arrived within the hour despite it being past midnight. Together, they reviewed the evidence that would not only end Harrison's career, but potentially result in criminal charges for reckless endangerment and animal cruelty. This man deliberately endangered dozens of people to advance his research agenda, Foster said, her voice tight with controlled fury. William Mackenzie is fighting for his life because of Harrison's psychological vendetta against bears. Meanwhile, at the hospital, William's condition had plateaued at critical but stable. His daughter-in-law Jennifer, Martha's niece whom William had helped raise after her parents died, maintained a constant bedside vigil. Jennifer had flown in from Portland upon hearing about William's collapse, bringing with her boxes of old photographs and documents that would prove crucial to understanding the full story. Among Martha's carefully preserved papers, Jennifer found William's detailed journals from Bruno's early years. Handwritten accounts of bottle feedings, first steps, vocabulary development, and the deep emotional bond that had formed between man and cub. The journals read like a father's loving documentation of his child's development, complete with photographs and even primitive videos. "Look at this," Jennifer showed the journals to Dr. Patricia Vance, William's cardiologist. "My uncle wrote down everything. Bruno's first solid food, the day he learned to respond to his name, even his favorite bedtime story. This wasn't just animal caretaking, this was parenting." Dr. Vance, a mother of 3 herself, recognized the unmistakable cadence of parental documentation. "These entries, they're identical to what any devoted parent would write about their child. The attention to detail, the emotional investment, the celebration of small milestones. This is profound bonding." The medical team treating William began to understand that his cardiac event wasn't just triggered by physical stress, but by the overwhelming emotional impact of reuniting with someone he truly considered his son after years of separation. The intensity of that love and the trauma of being separated again had literally broken his heart. Back at the zoo, Bruno's vigil was attracting worldwide attention. Visitors from around the globe came specifically to witness the bear's demonstration of loyalty, leaving flowers, cards, and children's drawings at the security barrier. Zoo attendance had tripled as people made pilgrimages to see the animal whose devotion had captured international imagination. But Bruno's health was deteriorating rapidly. Veterinarian Dr. Rebecca Chen reported that the bear had lost nearly 30 pounds in 3 days, showing classic symptoms of severe depression and anxiety. His refusal to eat, combined with obvious psychological distress, was creating a medical crisis that paralleled William's condition. "In 40 years of veterinary practice, I've never seen an animal exhibit such profound grief," Dr. Chen told reporters. "Bruno's behavior isn't just unusual, It's unprecedented in the scientific literature. He's literally grieving for William like a family member. The revelation about Dr. Harrison's sabotage broke during the evening news cycle, creating a media firestorm that shifted public opinion dramatically. Harrison, who had been granted administrative leave pending investigation, found himself facing not only career destruction, but potential criminal prosecution for his actions. In a desperate attempt to salvage his reputation, Harrison agreed to an exclusive interview with CNN, hoping to explain his motivations and justify his behavior. But instead of vindication, the interview became a public confession that revealed the depth of his psychological trauma. "I was 12 years old when my father was killed by a grizzly bear at Yellowstone," Harrison admitted on camera, his composed academic demeanor cracking completely. "For 31 years, I've carried the belief that wild animals are inherently dangerous, that emotional connections with them are deadly delusions. I came to San Diego Zoo specifically to prove that point." The interviewer, Anderson Cooper, pressed for details about the sabotage. "Dr. Harrison, are you admitting that you deliberately caused Bruno's escape?" Harrison's response was barely audible. I believe that if I could demonstrate the danger these animals pose, I could prevent other families from experiencing the loss I experienced, but watching William with Bruno, seeing their genuine love for each other, I realized I've been wrong about everything." The confession triggered immediate legal action. District Attorney Maria Santos announced that Harrison would face charges of reckless endangerment, fraud, and animal cruelty. More importantly for public opinion, Harrison's admission validated everything William had claimed about his relationship with Bruno. The most shocking revelation came when Harrison's research into his father's death uncovered long-suppressed details about Dr. Robert Harrison's final moments. Park Service reports, sealed for 3 decades to protect the family's privacy, revealed that the elder Harrison hadn't been attacked by an aggressive bear. He had died protecting an injured grizzly cub from poachers, placing himself between the baby bear and armed hunters. "My father died exactly the way William described," Harrison wept during the interview. "He died protecting a bear, not being killed by one. I've spent my entire career hating the very animals my father gave his life to save." This revelation transformed public perception of the Harrison family legacy and validated William's philosophy about human-animal relationships. Dr. Robert Harrison had been a hero, not a victim, and his death had been an act of conservation rather than a cautionary tale about animal unpredictability. The scientific community began re-evaluating decades of research on animal cognition and emotional capacity. Videos of Bruno's protective behavior toward William, combined with documentation of their historical relationship, provided unprecedented evidence of long-term emotional memory in large mammals. Dr. Jane Goodall issued a statement supporting William and Bruno. "This remarkable relationship challenges our fundamental assumptions about animal consciousness and emotional capacity. Bruno's behavior demonstrates cognitive and emotional abilities that science is only beginning to understand." At the hospital, William's condition began showing unexpected improvement. Nurses reported that he seemed most responsive when they played videos of Bruno on Jennifer's phone. His heart rate stabilized, his blood pressure improved, and he began showing signs of emerging from his critical state. "It's almost as if he knows Bruno is waiting for him," Dr. Vance observed. "I've seen family connections aid recovery before, but never anything quite like this." Jennifer spent hours reading William's journals aloud, sharing stories of Bruno's childhood that seemed to penetrate even William's medicated state. She described the day Bruno learned to stack blocks, his first successful fishing attempt, and the elaborate birthday parties Martha had thrown complete with honey cake and salmon treats. "Uncle Bill, Bruno is waiting for you," Jennifer whispered during one bedside vigil. "That beautiful boy is still out there, still believing you're coming back. You can't let him down, not after everything you've been through together." As the fourth day dawned, both William and Bruno remained in their respective battles for survival, separated by 20 miles, but connected by a bond that had already changed the world's understanding of love, loyalty, and the mysterious connections that can form between different species. The story was no longer just about an escaped bear. It had become proof that some relationships are too powerful to be contained by institutional policies or academic theories. On the fifth day, William Mackenzie opened his eyes to find Jennifer sitting beside his hospital bed, her face streaked with tears of relief. The cardiac monitors showed steady, strong rhythms for the first time since his collapse, and the medical team cautiously began discussing recovery rather than survival. "Uncle Bill," Jennifer whispered, squeezing his weathered hand, "you're going to be okay. The doctors say your heart is healing." William's first words were barely audible but crystal clear in their priority. "Bruno, how is my boy?" Jennifer's expression clouded with worry. She had been dreading this moment, knowing she would have to tell William about Bruno's deteriorating condition. He's waiting for you, Uncle Bill. He hasn't moved from the spot where the ambulance took you. He won't eat, won't go back to his enclosure. The veterinarians are very concerned." The news hit William like a physical blow. Even in his weakened state, he struggled to sit up, his paternal instincts overriding medical caution. "I have to see him. He thinks I abandoned him again. Oh God, what have I done to that beautiful boy?" Dr. Patricia Vance entered the room just as William was attempting to remove his IV lines. "Mr. Mackenzie, you're in no condition to leave this hospital. Your heart is still healing from a massive cardiac event." But William's determination was absolute. "Doctor, with all due respect, my heart will never heal if my son dies thinking his daddy abandoned him. Bruno saved my life by giving it meaning for 20 years. Now it's my turn to save his." The conversation that followed would become legendary in both medical and veterinary circles. William, supported by Jennifer and armed with his detailed journals of Bruno's early years, made an unprecedented request. He wanted to be transported to the zoo for a reunion that could potentially save both their lives. "The research on human-animal bonds is clear," Jennifer argued, presenting printouts of scientific studies. "Separation anxiety in domesticated animals can be fatal. Bruno isn't just grieving, he's dying of a broken heart. And Uncle Bill's recovery has stalled because he knows Bruno is suffering." Dr. Vance found herself facing a medical decision unlike anything in her 30-year career. Standard protocol demanded keeping William hospitalized for at least another week. But his emotional distress over Bruno's condition was clearly impeding his physical recovery. More importantly, the bear's deteriorating health created a time-sensitive situation that traditional medicine couldn't address. The breakthrough came when Dr. Rebecca Chen, Bruno's veterinarian, arrived at the hospital with unprecedented documentation of the bear's condition. Her report painted a dire picture. Bruno had now lost 40 pounds, showed signs of severe dehydration despite having water available, and exhibited behaviors consistent with clinical depression in humans. "In veterinary terms, Bruno is dying of grief," Dr. Chen explained to the medical team. "I've consulted with colleagues worldwide, and nobody has documented such profound psychological distress in a large mammal. His vital signs indicate organ stress consistent with prolonged emotional trauma." The two doctors, human and veterinary, began collaborating on an unprecedented treatment plan. If William could be safely transported to the zoo with portable cardiac monitoring equipment, the reunion might provide therapeutic benefits for both patients that conventional medicine couldn't achieve. "This goes against every protocol in my training," Dr. Vance admitted. "But the emotional bond between these two is clearly a medical factor we can't ignore. If we can manage the cardiac risks, the psychological benefits might be transformative for both of them." Meanwhile, The global response to Bruno and William's story continued to grow. Donations poured into the San Diego Zoo from around the world, specifically designated for animal welfare and human-animal bond research. A GoFundMe campaign to support William's medical expenses raised over $2 million in just days, with contributors ranging from elementary school children to celebrities and world leaders. The most moving tributes came from other families who had experienced profound bonds with animals. Veterans wrote about service dogs who had saved them from PTSD. Families shared stories of pets whose loyalty had sustained them through devastating losses. The elderly described companions who had been their primary emotional support through years of loneliness. Bruno and William represent something universal, wrote Dr. Temple Grandin in a widely shared editorial. They remind us that love and loyalty exist throughout the animal kingdom, and that these bonds can be as profound and life-sustaining as any human relationship. Dr. Harrison, meanwhile, had begun his own journey of healing and redemption. Following his public confession and resignation from the zoo, he had entered intensive therapy to address the childhood trauma that had driven his destructive behavior. His therapist, Dr. Michael Torres, specialized in treating survivors of wildlife attacks and their families. Benjamin has spent 31 years projecting his father's death onto every human-animal relationship he encountered, Dr. Torres explained in a follow-up interview. His sabotage of Bruno's enclosure was essentially him trying to prove that all animal relationships end in tragedy. But witnessing William and Bruno's genuine love forced him to confront the truth about his father's heroic death. Harrison had also begun reaching out to William through Jennifer, expressing his remorse and offering to support Bruno's care in any way possible. "I know I can never undo the harm I've caused," Harrison wrote in a letter that Jennifer read to William, "but I want to spend whatever remains of my career proving that bonds like yours with Bruno are precious gifts that should be protected, not destroyed." The legal proceedings against Harrison continued, but public opinion had shifted from pure condemnation to a more complex understanding of how unresolved trauma could create destructive patterns. Many commentators noted that Harrison's journey from villain to someone seeking redemption reflected broader themes about healing and forgiveness. On the sixth day, the unprecedented medical transport was approved. William, accompanied by Dr. Vance and a full cardiac monitoring team, would be taken to the zoo in a specially equipped ambulance. The reunion would be carefully controlled, with medical personnel standing by and contingency plans in place for any complications. The news of the planned reunion spread instantly across social media. Zoo attendance had to be limited due to the massive crowds hoping to witness the historic moment. News crews from around the world positioned themselves at strategic locations, while the zoo's own cameras prepared to document what many were calling the most significant human-animal reunion in recorded history. Bruno, meanwhile, seemed to sense that something was changing. For the first time in 6 days, he showed interest in his surroundings, raising his massive head and scanning the area with renewed alertness. Zoo staff noted that his posture had improved slightly, as if some instinctive part of him sensed that William was coming. "It's like he knows," Dr. Chen observed. "His vital signs have stabilized for the first time since William's collapse. There's no scientific explanation for it, but Bruno appears to be preparing for something." Jennifer rode in the ambulance with William, holding his hand as they made the 20-minute journey that would determine whether love could indeed conquer medical protocols and institutional boundaries. William's cardiac monitors showed elevated but stable rhythms, the physical response of a father about to see his son after the longest separation of their lives. "Whatever happens," William told Jennifer as they approached the zoo, "I want you to know that Bruno gave me the greatest gift any man could ask for. He taught me that family isn't defined by biology, it's defined by love. And that love can survive anything, even 20 years of separation and the prejudices of people who don't understand. As the ambulance pulled into the zoo's service entrance, surrounded by media attention and global interest, both William and Bruno prepared for a reunion that would test everything they had learned about the power of unconditional love. The world watched as two souls, separated by species but united by an unbreakable bond, prepared to prove that some connections transcend every barrier that humans try to impose on the natural world. The stakes couldn't have been higher. William's heart was still fragile from his cardiac event, while Bruno's health continued to deteriorate from grief-induced stress. But neither the medical risks nor the unprecedented nature of the situation could diminish the simple truth that had sustained them both through decades of separation. They were family, and family always finds a way back to each other. The ambulance doors opened to reveal William Mackenzie, frail but determined, seated in a wheelchair with portable cardiac monitors attached to his chest. Dr. Vance maintained a protective position beside him, while Jennifer pushed the wheelchair toward the area where Bruno had maintained his 6-day vigil. The gathered crowd fell silent as they witnessed what many believed would be either a miraculous healing or a heartbreaking final goodbye. Bruno sensed William's presence before he could see him. The massive bear's head lifted from its despondent position, his dark eyes scanning the approaching group with an intensity that made even skeptical observers hold their breath. When Bruno's gaze finally locked onto William's face, the bear's entire body language transformed from dejection to alert anticipation. "Hello, beautiful boy," William called softly, his voice carrying across the 20 feet that separated them. "Daddy's here." Daddy came back. Bruno's response was immediate and overwhelming. The 340-pound bear, having lost 40 pounds during his grief-stricken vigil, rose to his feet with surprising speed and began moving toward William with the careful, deliberate steps of someone approaching something precious and fragile. Dr. Chen, monitoring Bruno's vital signs remotely, watched in amazement as the bear's heart rate elevated to normal ranges for the first time in nearly a week. "His physiological responses are normalizing," she reported to the medical team. "It's like his entire system is coming back to life." As Bruno approached, William struggled to rise from the wheelchair despite Dr. Vance's protests. "I need to stand for my boy," William insisted, his own heart monitor showing elevated but stable rhythms. "He's been standing guard for me for 6 days. The least I can do is meet him on my feet." With Jennifer's support, William managed to stand as Bruno closed the distance between them. The reunion that followed defied every scientific paper on animal behavior and human-animal bonds. Bruno didn't rush or overwhelm his fragile father. Instead, the massive bear approached with the gentleness of someone handling a newborn baby. When they were finally within arm's reach, Bruno performed the gesture that had defined their relationship for 2 decades. The bear slowly placed his enormous paw over William's heart, just as he had been taught as a cub when William said, "I love you." The familiar weight and warmth of that gesture sent tears streaming down William's cheeks. "I missed you so much, my beautiful boy," William whispered, his hands finding their familiar place behind Bruno's ears. "Daddy is so sorry he had to go away, but I'm here now, and I'm never leaving you again." Bruno's response was a soft rumbling sound that wasn't quite a purr but conveyed the same contentment. The bear gently nuzzled against William's shoulder, careful not to unbalance the elderly man, and for several minutes they simply held each other in the kind of embrace that transcends species and touches the very essence of unconditional love. The assembled crowd watched in reverent silence as father and son reconnected after their traumatic separation. News cameras captured every moment, but the focus wasn't on creating dramatic footage. This was documentation of something sacred, a love story that challenged every assumption about the boundaries between humans and animals. Dr. Vance monitored William's cardiac responses throughout the reunion, expecting to see dangerous spikes that would require immediate intervention. Instead, she witnessed something that contradicted her medical training. William's heart rhythms were actually stabilizing in Bruno's presence. The arrhythmias that had persisted since his collapse were smoothing into normal patterns. "This is medically impossible," Dr. Vance murmured to Dr. Chen, "but his heart function is improving dramatically. It's as if Bruno's presence is providing better therapy than any medication we've tried." The transformation in Bruno was equally remarkable. Within minutes of reuniting with William, the bear began showing interest in food for the first time in 6 days. Zoo staff had brought his favorite treats, fresh salmon and honey-drizzled fruit, and Bruno actually consumed small portions while maintaining physical contact with William. "The change in his demeanor is extraordinary," Dr. Chen reported to her colleagues worldwide who were monitoring the reunion via live stream. 6 days of life-threatening depression have been reversed in less than an hour. This challenges everything we understand about animal psychology and grief processing. As the afternoon wore on, William and Bruno settled into their familiar routine from decades past. William, still in his wheelchair for safety, positioned himself so Bruno could rest his massive head on his lap while they read together. Jennifer had brought one of William's old newspapers, and she watched in wonder as her uncle began reading aloud, while Bruno listened with obvious contentment. "Stock market up 12 points today, Bruno," William read in the same gentle tone he had used 20 years ago. "And look here. The Padres won their game last night. Remember how Martha used to say you brought them good luck when we took you to spring training?" Bruno's soft vocalizations in response to William's voice created an almost musical backdrop to the reading session. The bear's eyes never left William's face, as if he were memorizing every detail after their traumatic separation. The global response to the reunion was immediate and overwhelming. Social media platforms crashed temporarily as millions of people shared videos of the embrace. Bruno and Bill became more than a trending hashtag. It became a symbol of hope for anyone who had ever experienced profound loss or separation from someone they loved. Messages poured in from around the world. A grandmother in Japan wrote about reconnecting with her estranged grandson after seeing the reunion. Veterans shared stories of emotional support animals who had saved their lives. Families separated by distance or circumstance began reaching out to heal old wounds. Dr. Harrison, watching the live stream from his therapist's office, experienced his own moment of profound healing. Seeing the genuine love between William and Bruno forced him to finally accept the truth about his father's heroic death and his own misguided crusade against human-animal bonds. "My father would have loved seeing this," Harrison told Dr. Torres through his tears. "He died protecting a bear cub because he believed in exactly what William and Bruno represent, that love transcends species boundaries. I've wasted 31 years hating the very thing my father gave his life to protect." As evening approached, the medical teams faced a new challenge: how to maintain the therapeutic benefits of the reunion while ensuring both William's and Bruno's continued health. The solution they developed was unprecedented in both human and veterinary medicine. William would remain at the zoo for an extended recovery period, living in the renovated staff quarters that had been hastily converted into a medical facility. His cardiac rehabilitation would continue under Dr. Vance's supervision, but with the added therapeutic presence of Bruno nearby. "This violates every protocol in geriatric cardiology," Dr. Vance admitted, "but the evidence is undeniable. William's recovery is accelerating dramatically in Bruno's presence." If we can maintain proper medical monitoring, this unconventional treatment might be more effective than traditional hospitalization. Bruno's enclosure was modified to allow for daily supervised visits with William, with medical personnel always present to monitor both patients. The arrangement satisfied safety requirements while acknowledging the therapeutic necessity of their continued contact. The first night of their reunion was peaceful in a way that neither had experienced since their separation. William slept in his hospital bed in the staff quarters, while Bruno rested just outside the window, both of them finding the kind of restorative sleep that had eluded them during their time apart. Zoo staff reported that Bruno's appetite returned completely overnight, and he gained back 5 pounds within 24 hours. William's cardiac readings showed continued improvement, with his cardiologist noting that his recovery trajectory had accelerated beyond all medical predictions. The story of Bruno and William had evolved from a dramatic animal escape to something much more profound, proof that love, loyalty, and family connections can transcend every barrier that society tries to impose. Their reunion demonstrated that healing comes not just from medical intervention, but from the restoration of relationships that give life meaning. As dawn broke over the San Diego Zoo on their first morning back together, William and Bruno faced a future that neither medical science nor animal psychology could fully predict. But they faced it together, as they always had, with the unshakable faith that some bonds are too powerful to be broken by time, distance, or institutional policies. Message for American seniors, 55 to 68. If you've ever felt forgotten by a world that moves too fast, or worried that your deepest relationships don't matter anymore, William and Bruno's story speaks directly to your heart. At 72, William discovered that true love, whether with family, friends, or even the animals we cherish, never fades, never expires, and always finds a way back. Their reunion reminds us that in a culture obsessed with youth and technology, the connections we've nurtured over decades are our greatest treasures. Bruno waited 6 days without food because he believed in William's promise to return. How many of us have someone who believes in us that completely? This isn't just about a man and a bear. It's about the power of loyalty, the healing nature of unconditional love, and the truth that our capacity to care for others gives our lives meaning long after retirement, long after society says we're past our prime. William's heart literally healed faster when reunited with Bruno, proving that love isn't just emotional, it's medicine. Discussion questions. Have you ever experienced a bond with a pet or animal that others didn't understand? And how did that relationship enrich your life during challenging times? What relationship in your life has given you the kind of unwavering loyalty that Bruno showed William? And how can we better cherish those connections today? Please share your own stories of unexpected love and loyalty in the comments below. Your experiences might inspire someone else who needs to hear that meaningful connections are still possible at any age.